Peeps, it's lecture number 4. Number 4? Hey, I'm a little hoarse this morning. I don't know why. I just am. Um, I went to Oklahoma and visited my sister, but it's not like I was screaming or anything. Anyway, so there you go. That's what I sound like. Anyway, the American Revolution. Yay! Or boo, boo. Um, you probably learned this in grade school and middle school and high school, and you're thinking right now, God, really, Peg, another lecture on the American Revolution? Because I don't already hate history, but peeps, it's going to be all right. You might actually think when we're over with this, okay, I get it, why this is important now. And even if you don't, this is an American history class, so we can't just skip the American Revolution. Let's go see what's happening. Next slide, huh? So one of the things I find super frustrating about American history, the way it's taught in, say, high schools, and no shade on high school history teachers, I'm sure they're working hard and doing their best, and this class is no place to be mean to teachers or really anyone. But anyway, my frustration with this revolution is often it's taught like these 4 white guys or 6 white guys or 8 white guys, but some small collection of white guys were like the heroes of the day, and thank goodness for them, we have an American Revolution. And the problem with this is it doesn't make any sense. Um, because the American Revolution is fundamentally a popular revolution. It's not a coup. It's not like January 6th. It's a, everybody one day said, we don't want the King of England to be the boss of us anymore. It has to have been more people than 4 white guys or 6 white guys. It has to be. That's what makes sense to me. Fundamentally, so the thing comes down to, so all that stuff I just said was A, and now we look at B. It comes down to what happens is English colonists, English people come to North America, and then to some extent, a small number of non-English immigrants. But in the early years, they're mostly English. And they're being, and for sure, the colonies are being ruled by England. So by the king back in London, and who's poor mad George King III. Um, and and because colonial North America is different from England, and because the people are far, far away from England and the king and that system, they develop some really different ideas about how the world should be. And they don't want the old stuff, they want the new stuff. And it's kind of interesting. Let's go see the next slide to see that. Yeah. All right. So before we go on to talk about revolutionary political ideology, ooh, that's a lot of fancy words, right? Before we do that, let's take a look at the political spectrum. So we think, particularly in America now, in a kind of post the orange rapist, or maybe we're not post. It's hard to know. Thing that the left and the right are really, the Democrats are the left and the Republicans are the right. But actually, if you were to put them on this political spectrum, you'd put them on either side of kind of the middle. So really what the political spectrum is about is power sharing. So on the far left, you have the people have all the power. And on the far right, you have some strong leader has all the power, and the people have none. So what you get in reality is on the far left, you get real communism. Now here's the problem. There is no real communist nation in the world. All the so-called communists, and imagine me putting the little finger bunny ears around that. All those communist countries, and by which I mean mostly Russia and China, maybe Cuba, they're really dictatorships. They're not communist, because communist political ideology says all the people share everything, and we don't have a leader who tells us what to do. We all decide. And indeed, then real communism functions like absolute democracy. They're the same thing. So when you're in America bitching and you're like, we're about democracy, not communism. I think it's worth keeping in mind that democracy at its purest form is communism. It's a commune. Which means the people, a community. The people decide things. What we have in America is a representative democracy. So we vote, some of us vote, mostly the white people vote, and hey, you should all vote. But the people vote for other people who then make decisions for you. That's representative democracy. We don't vote on everything in America. The Supreme Court does horrifyingly rotten things, and we don't get a vote on that. But in theory, it's a representative democracy because we voted for the people who then put the Supreme Court in power. Now, in 21st century America, it's not quite that clear cut because the Supreme Court has swung very far to the right because a minority who did not win an election managed to seize power, put those people in power. So I think that's why everybody's so cranky with the Supreme Court right now. But that's not my point. And so the far left is everybody, all the people make all the decisions. That's a really unwieldy system. Can you imagine if you had to stop and vote on every single tiny thing that happened in America? You wouldn't want to. And then on the far right, you have absolutism. So a strong leader, be it Putin or King George or whoever's in China now. And I should know that, and I don't, because I aggressively don't pay attention to the news. I don't want to be sad. Anyway, the far right, the people have little or no power. Okay, so that's the spectrum. That was a long conversation, but I think it's worth understanding. Next slide. So you're going to have to just hold on. I'm going to show you some pictures of really old white dudes, and then you're going to be like, Peg, no, Peg, no, don't do it. It's okay. Maybe you won't. Maybe I'm full of it. Anyway, there's some really cool political ideas born long, long ago. And we're going to start with Thomas Hobbes. He's a political philosopher in the 1600s. And he grew up in the middle of the English Civil War. So the English had a civil war, was really violent. It was the monarchists against the not monarchists. That's a vast oversimplification, but we're not here for that. And so Hobbes grew up in this time of immense instability and violence. And so he thought the perfect political system would give you stability, order, and peace. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because he grew up in immense instability. And he craved stability, order, and peace, as a lot of us do. Like after the pandemic, a lot of us just wanted things to be nice and happy because the pandemic was so stressful. So he thought that absolutism, remember the political spectrum, that'd be way over on the right. That's Putin or the king are completely in charge of stuff. That absolutism rocked because, one, here's his basic premise. This is the key to Thomas Hobbes' political philosophy. People are bad. Indeed, he said, people are a great beast. He said, in their state of nature. And state of nature is a thing where they say, what are people just like? If you take away society and the clothes and the manners and all that, what are people fundamentally like? He said, we're bad, we're selfish, we're violent, we're terrible. You could literally, if we were in a classroom, we could divide the room up. Hobbesians, people think people are bad over here, and then we're going to go do Thomas Locke over here, that people are, if given a chance, good. And all of you, and you're young, so many of you are cynical, and so you think, well, people are bad. Or you've had some bad life experiences, so you think people are bad. I think people are good, but I'm a big optimist and a big, soft, goofy feminist and witch. So I think people are good. But Hobbes would think I was a lunatic. So the notion was that for society to be stable and peaceful, and because people were bad, you needed a stable ruler to keep the badness in place so that things could be nice. That makes sense? Yeah. Let's go look at the next slide. This is key to both Hobbes, and then we're going to talk about Locke next, is this notion of the social contract. And here I have a moderately goofy cartoon for that. But the notion was The social contract is this unspoken deal we have. Like in America, the social contract is we all go to work and we work hard, and that the people and we will vote for the people in charge, and then the people in charge will make sure that the world that we live in is fair, that we all pay an equitable amount of taxes, that we all have equal access to the things we need, etc., etc. And the disagreement comes in who is we and what do we need, but nonetheless, the social contract. What is the deal that the people make with their rulers? And Hobbes's deal was you cede your authority, you cede your power to make decision in the world, so that, to the ruler, who then, with his absolute power, keeps you safe. That's the social contract for Hobbes. He thought it was a good one because safety was important to him. You can see that what this relies on, what's the Hobbesian social contract requires is a good ruler. And we know, man, those are hard to come by, right? Yeah. Okay, so Peg, why are we talking about Thomas Hobbes? Oh my God. Oh, this is probably the most famous Hobbes quote, and you've probably heard some version of this, that life is in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. What you often hear is sort of life is nasty, brutish, and short. You hear that part. And if you haven't heard it, you've heard some iteration of it, trust me, even if you don't know it. So why does Hobbes matter? Because fundamental to Hobbes, in spite of the fact that he was all about we should have an absolute ruler, he also believed that people should be treated, treated equally and rationally. That is, that the absolute ruler had a responsibility to treat all of his people equally, and that treatment should be rational. So not just treated equally like everybody should be whipped every day, because that's equal, but it's not rational, right? So hence the social contract, which was, and here's the list of it here on the right, people need safety and security, so the leader or monarch provides safety and security. In return, people give up their liberty to the monarch, and then they don't have any right to complain, because the monarch has this big burden. But the monarch's job is to be just and to be fair. That everything that and then because that's the monarch's job, whatever the monarch does is just and fair, because the social contract says so. Ooh, you can see here Hobbes puts a great amount of faith in the monarch being just and fair. And as people, here we are, inheritors of now an over 200 years of American representative democracy. It's super hard for us to believe that the people in charge will be just and fair just because they're in charge. We're like, no, that doesn't make any sense. But it did to Hobbes. But what you can see here is this beginning sort of this notion that the people have needs, that the monarch has responsibilities. So that's, I think, what's key here. Okay? Cool? Right. Next slide. Then enter, just a few decades later, John Locke. And what John Locke does is he takes the Hobbes stuff, and Hobbes was really famous. He takes the Hobbes stuff, and then he adds to it, he refines it, he changes it, and it gets us closer and closer to American democracy. We're not there yet, but so we got Hobbes. If you go way back to what are the underpinnings of American democracy, you have Hobbes with this notion that the people don't have time to do all the ruling, and that the ruler has a job and the ruler should be fair. So we got that. Then we get John Locke. John Locke was born and raised after the American Revolution, so he's not so concerned with safety and security. People who were born in times that are safety and secure, or like people who grew up in safe and secure households, don't have a high need for that because they just assume that's the way the world is. If you grew up in a really insecure, unsafe household, you're super concerned with safety. I grew up in a fairly happy and fairly safe household, and I don't spend a lot of time worrying about safety. I'm also white, so I have all the white privilege. But anyway, Locke didn't think people were naturally bad or good, but rather that people were a blank slate. That the second bullet point, tabula rasa means blank slate in Latin. in Latin. But he also thought, yeah, you're born a blank slate. You just are. But then your family, your mother, and your society can all shift you either good or bad depending on what happens to you. That is, that you could go either way, but that all things being equal, you were most likely to be good. That people, their self-interest was about being nice to other people and good and fair. Okay, I actually believe that. And if you don't, that's okay. It's okay to be a Hobbesian. We don't need to agree here. We just need to know the stuff, right? And I'm not saying one or the other is wrong. I think it'd be really easy to argue either side of the coin. So, um, um, unlike Hobbes, Locke says people have a fundamental right to property, not safety, property. That we have a right to our things, that our land should be secure, our homes should be secure, that our neighbors shouldn't be able to come in and take our stuff, and that all people have a right to at least the minimum amount of property that would keep you alive and safe. That is, property, Locke thought, is what keeps you safe, not your monarch. Okay? So we're going to get to Thomas Jefferson just rampantly and without reason, no, with plenty of reason, he plagiarized John Locke because John Locke said people had a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. And when Thomas Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, he plagiarized Locke, and then he took it to the Congress, the Continental Congress, so the Congress while we were still fighting the war before we were an independent nation. And they're like, dude, that seems kind of venal. So they changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness under the notion that property equaled happiness. Yeah? And if you've ever bought, like, I just went to a really fancy yarn store in Oklahoma City, and I bought 4 skeins of yarn, spent $100 on them. I know. Made me ridiculously happy. It was really good yarn. It was a cute yarn store. The lady, it was in Oklahoma, but the lady was a Californian. That was in the yarn store. It was so cute. I was so happy. Yeah, property made me happy. Yay! Anyway, enough about yarn. Next slide. Oh, I make me laugh. That's a picture of Richard Nixon right after he was forced to resign the presidency for corruption in 1973. And then when he's getting on the helicopter, he did the victory thing. And it's a kind of famous picture because it's like, dude, you were just forced to resign for being like the second worst president ever. Because the worst one's still out there running around right now. Anyway, it's not a victory dance. So I put that picture to be a smart aleck. So Locke's social contract is this. So remember, Hobbes' social contract is the people give up freedom and the ruler keeps people safe and he's fair. Locke said, no, the ruler agrees to respect people and their property. That the ruler's job is to make sure that people's property is secure. But then people have a right to all of their own belief systems. They have a right to say what they think. They have a right to worship as they think. And this is this is really important because here, like we think religion, like what church we go to, but for people in the 16 and 1700s, religion was how they fundamentally understood the world. So what he's saying is people have a right to their own religion. What he's really saying is people have a right to understand the world any way they want. And just because you understand in the world, for example, that women shouldn't have the right to control their bodies and that gay and trans people are terrible, that doesn't mean you have a right to push that belief on the rest of us. You should shut your mouth and sit down because your beliefs are your business. And then here's key to what's important about Locke's social contract. If the ruler is messing up, like Nixon or like the king, the people have the right to replace the ruler. The ruler isn't appointed by God to do, and whatever he does is good. If the ruler is a screw up, the ruler be gone. See ya. So that's very different. And what'll happen is they'll set up a system where not only are we allowed to kick out rulers and replace them, elections, but that we create a system where where they're fundamentally replaced every few years, regardless, for most things, not all things. There's no term limits for the Congress and the Senate, and the Supreme Court can just run amok all it wants. But a notion that most of our rulers um, uh, get replaced every 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, or at least we have the ability to replace them if we'd like to. Yeah? Okay, next slide. All right, so to get to the American Revolution, to get to a moment where a bunch of colonial people who were fundamentally English, both most of them, not all of them, but most of them by heritage and all of them legally because they were an English colony. How do we get to the point where they say, screw that, we don't want that, we're going to make war on England and we're going to be our own nation? We get Hobbes and we get Locke, but we also get the Great Awakening. So now we're going to talk about religion. Oh no! Oh, or yay! Depends on your feeling. Here's the thing, though. In 21st century America, many of us understand religion to be a force of oppression and conservative ideas and and pushing your ideas on other people whether they want it or not. But for lots and lots of American history, um, religion was a force for increasing democracy, for opening doors. The abolition of slavery, for example, that movement was absolutely led by religious people who understood slavery to be an anathema against God. Now, here we have the Great Awakening. It's a series of evangelical revivals in the 1730s and 40s. And what's interesting about it is like people will tell you, you see this in like this stupid social media and stupid conservative people. I don't mean all conservatives are stupid. I mean some conservatives are stupid, just like some progressives are stupid, because some people are stupid. But this notion that America was born as a Christian nation and that everybody has always gone to church, and it's simply not true. One, the founders intended this nation to not be any religion at all, so that everybody could make their own choice. And also, in the decades before the American Revolution, most Americans weren't going to church. Um, in the North, the dominant church was the Puritans, or they would become known as the Congregationalists, and they weren't doing it for people. We just had the witchcraft lecture, and a lot of people looked at that and sort of this conflation, this confusion of church and state, and said that church has way too much power. They can kill people if they want to. They have too much control over people's lives. You can stand outside somebody's window and watch them have sex, and then inform on them to the authorities, and then they can be killed. That's too much power in the hands of religion. In the South, in the southern states, so Maryland and South, most of the major church was the Anglican Church, and the Anglican Church was very much seen as connected with the king and the aristocracy. So people saw it as like, well, that's a church for rich people, and I'm a poor person, and or I'm a slave, because there's lots of slaves in the American Revolution, and they fight in the American Revolution. But this Anglican Church doesn't do anything for me. It's a church of powerful people. So what happens is a whole generation of young men, and it is men, because nobody's sending girls to college. It's, what is that? That stupid Kansas City Chiefs kicker guy who was like, girls, that's nice that you went to college, but now, go home and make babies. Ugh. Anyway, nobody sent their daughters to college in the 1700s. And most people who went to college to be preachers. If you were going to be a lawyer, you apprenticed with a lawyer. If you're going to be a doctor, you apprenticed with a doctor. But if you wanted to be, you went to college to be a minister, to be a preacher. And so these guys, they live in this world where they're like, yeah, I don't really like the Puritans, or I don't really like the Anglican Church. But then they go to church and they're trained to be ministers, and they get out and they're like, but I don't want to be that. Or I want to be a minister, but I don't want to be that flavor of minister. So what happens in the 1730s and 40s is there's a whole bunch of young men sort of roaming the country. They don't have a church, so how do you make money? Well, you go out like this picture, and you find yourself on probably any given Sunday, like like a football game. You set up a podium somewhere, you put up signs and say you're going to be preaching, and then you give a sermon and you get everybody roused up and you sing some songs and then you pass the hat and they give you money. So it's a little bit like busking at the Ren Fair. Um, and, 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 and that's how you make your living. And then you would travel around and do that. And sometimes you'd hit a town where people would be like, Mr. Brown, we like the cut of your jib. Why don't you stay here? We'll build you a church and you can preach to us every Sunday because we think you're the shit. So that would sometimes happen. And the notion was these guys are out there preaching all the ideas they learned in college. And they learned about Hobbes and they learned about Locke. And they begin to think not only is this college stuff, oh yeah, have we should all be able to do what we want and we should be happy and we should be in charge of ourselves and our rulers should be replaced if they're naughty. But then they combine that with their religion and we begin to get sort of a completely new, and it really is a completely new way of thinking about the world. You get some approximation of this in ancient Greece, but one that was a long time ago, and two, Grecian democracy was slightly different. What develops here in North America, in the part of America that would become the United States of America, is something that really is new and kind of exciting. Next slide. So these guys, they go out on these revivals and they travel up and down. Pretty much everybody lives near the coast. You see that map? That's not just because we don't care about Ohio and Indiana and Tennessee and Kentucky. It's because the only people who live in those places in the 1730s and 40s are the indigenous people. The colonists, the white colonists, haven't spread that far. In a world without trains and cars and freeways and the internet, people have to live close to the coast because that's where the ships are, because that's where the rivers are, because that's how you communicate. That's how you get your. There's no point in being a farmer if there's no way to get your goods to market, all that stuff. Anyway, so these guys travel up and down the coast. And what's super interesting about it, ladies and gentlemen who think the revolution is all about like dudes, is that 2/3 of the revival goers are women. So women go to these revivals and then they hear, hey, you should be in charge of yourself. Hey, no absolute ruler should be in charge of yourself, including your husband. And you have a right to happiness and you have a right to property and you should determine your world and you should be able to have any religious belief you want and you should be able to speak your mind if you want. They hear all this stuff and women find that tremendously exciting because they're coming from this Puritan world of women belong to men, this world of coverture, where men can arbitrarily decide you're a witch and kill you, where husbands can tell women what to do and women don't have much say in it. And so they find these new ideas really exciting. And so they're like, hey, Sheila, you want to go to the revival this weekend? Yeah, I heard that was really cool. Let's go. And they go and they party down. And then they go home and they talk to their families, their husbands, their children, their parents, their friends about these ideas. So the spread of the ideas is really two-tier. One, you have these revivalist, new preachers going up and down the coast having these revivals, these religious meetings that are really about personal politics too. And then mostly women go to these. So how do the ideas get to all the people who didn't go to the revival? Women. Women are the intermediary. They are the Insta, they are the Twitter of their day. Well, that's cool, right? Next slide. And here's like the big finish for Enlightenment ideas. I don't mean it's the big finish for the lecture. You wish. Well, we're getting there. Anyway, is that what we all get is we get this movement called the Enlightenment. And key to the Enlightenment is this big, big idea. Free will. Free will. Free will is you decide. I want to be a history professor. My parents wanted me to be a microbiologist. I am a history professor because I am the captain of my ship. I am a witch, even though my parents wanted me to be Catholic, because I am the captain of my ship. I have free will. I decide what's best for me. Free will. And I think it's super easy because you live in a world where free will is one of the predominant notions about how individuals interact with the world. To think that that's somehow natural or inborn, but it's not at all. Like remember the last lecture? People thought the world was ruled by predestination. That is that somehow some unseen divine beings, God and Satan, um, 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 divided you up and decided what you were going to be. And when you were born, it was already decided. You you were predestined to be a blacksmith and to go to heaven. You were predestined to be a witch and to go to hell. Uh, um, but what free will says is you're not predestined for anything. You choose. You to boss at you. And key to that for them isn't you choose your major or you choose your job or you choose your spouse, though those things are all important. For the people in at about the time of the American Revolution, for those people, it's you choose if you're good or bad. You choose God or Satan. You decide. And this really changes the game. So if you think about it, under predestination, if the world was a gym class, God and Satan are like the popular kids and they're picking teams. And you're standing against the wall thinking, pick me. But you have no control. But what free will says is, now you are the cool kid. And God and Satan are standing against the wall going, pick me. See that? It fundamentally means that in a weird sort of way, you are the boss of God and Satan. And I don't mean to be heretical for those of you that take your Christianity or whatever your religion is, because Mama don't care. Take it seriously. I'm not dissing God, or goddess forbid Satan, I guess, but rather saying that in your choice, you in some way have some power over God, because God needs you to pick him, not by or her, not vice versa. And that's the ultimate power, because it makes each individual a tiny God. Again, without meaning any heresy. You see it? You see the power? This is the way you understand the world. Okay, next slide. So let's get more specific. What are the political ramifications of free will? It means that people can make their own choices about what they believe in, then they get to make their own churches. They are no longer, you can force them, hey, we are the government and we say this is the church and you all have to go to it. Rather, people get to decide. I go to the Baptist church. I go to and mostly what they mean here in North America, let's not fool ourselves. They don't mean that you have the right to be a Jew or a Muslim or a witch. What they mean is you can pick all of these flavors of Christianity. But it's a start. Because once you tell people you can pick your own church, you open the door for all the non-Christian stuff. Yeah? Because key is you get to choose your religious beliefs. And to do that, people need freedom of religion. So no more state religions. Very much so. I don't care what the conservatives have told you. Very much so. This nation was founded on the principle that there should be no state religion, that government should have nothing to do with religion, because people needed to be able to choose and practice religion freely, and they couldn't do that if government had its fingers in that pie. C, this makes also key to free will and the Enlightenment is this notion that people should be skeptical of authority, that just because you're the boss of me doesn't mean you get to continue to be the boss of me. Just because you're the boss of me doesn't mean you're better than me or smarter than me. You're just the boss of me. And if you irritate me, I can vote to replace you because you're only the boss of me because I let you be the boss of me. That is, people become really skeptical of this sort of notion that our higher ups are somehow better than us. That then leads to D, that people want to replace unreasonable power and authority. If you're in authority over me and you are unreasonable and I don't like you, I get to replace you. If you are the president during a pandemic and you badly mismanage it and millions of people die, we get to vote you out. And you have to live with it January 6th aside. Okay? Now we get to replace unreasonable power and authority. And that then leads, again, this is just a little cascade, E, to home rule, which is, we're like, well, yeah, duh. In California, Californians vote on California laws. But in colonial America, the English government was in London, across the Atlantic Ocean. And the king was in London, across the Atlantic Ocean. And free will means if we're going to decide about what you're going to do, you need to know who we are. And that means you need to be here with us. That is, we shouldn't be ruled by somebody far away who's never seen us and doesn't know who we're about or what we do. That we should be ruled by people that are us, not them. The irony is the United States would establish itself and then in the first few decades decide, well, we should just go around the world telling people what to do. That's imperialism. That's colonialism. But we're born of this impetus that colonialism is bad and that other people shouldn't tell us what to do. Okay? So what happens with all these ideas is that's the real revolution. People think it's the war. I think what you were thinking when you opened this lecture is that we were going to get a battle. We were going to get a parade of battles. And then there was this battle, and then there was the Continental Congress, and then there was that battle, and then George Washington went to Valley Forge, and his toes were really cold, and then there was another battle. The wars, I'm not saying wars are unimportant, but they're generally the American Revolution for sure is a working out of the ideas that were born before the war. That the real revolution is the revolution that happens in people's brains and hearts before the war. They change how they think about the world, and then they look at their English rulers and think, I'm supposed to be English too, but I'm not the same kind of English as you. I'm a new kind of English. I'm going to call myself an American, and I don't want you to be the boss of me anymore. I want us to be the boss of us. That's the revolution. And it takes an entire population to think that way, to have a revolution. Not 4 old white guys, or 6 old white guys, or 8 old white guys. It takes a sea change in thinking brought out by the people, ideas that women help spread. Yeah, that's the revolution. Next slide. So fundamentally, when we get to the war, where we work out that revolution and ideas, what we get is that women and regular guys, regular people, and some people whose ancestors were born in Africa, they make the revolution, not 10 pasty white guys. The people, which includes women and people of color, make the revolution. They fight in it because their brains have been changed, their ideas have been changed. They want freedom. They want a separation of church and state. They want to be in charge of themselves. They want to be able to replace the rulers. All these new ideas. How about some examples? Here's some good ones. Crispus Attucks, as the first, the very first person to be killed in the American Revolution. He was actually killed in a rebellion in Boston before the war had officially started. But everybody recognizes that this Boston Rebellion was part, indeed, perhaps the first part of the war. So Crispus Attucks is, and we don't know a ton about him, but we know enough. He believed in freedom, and he believed in independence, not just for the nation, but for individuals. And he thought, this sounds like good stuff. Um, that all of us, including people who look like me, people whose parents were from Africa, that we should have freedom and free will. And so he shows up in Boston and he participated in this Boston Rebellion. And the British soldiers killed him. And then, and some other people, but he was the first to die. Probably targeted because he was black, if I had to guess. And I do have to guess because we can't know what was in the heart. We can't know for sure what was in the heart of the British soldier that killed him. But his death did radicalize the colonists because they all thought, listen, here's this guy he's not even legally free. He's not the same kind of member of our society. If even he was willing to fight and die for this, we should all be willing to fight and die. And so it becomes kind of a symbol of the revolution for a lot of people about the importance of self-determination, of free will, of freedom for all individuals, not just white dudes. Next example. Let's go see the next one. Oh, I love Mary Hayes, or Molly Pitcher. Molly Pitcher is her nickname. Look at her. She looks like she could take you in a fight. Uh, what happened in the revolution is keep in mind that when the Americans, and they're really the colonists, because there is no United States of America, so there's technically no Americans, but they understand themselves as different from the English people, from the British Army and the Redcoats. When a lot of times these guys go off to fight, because there's no official nation yet, the American army doesn't exist the way it does now. So you don't, and pay is scanty because you got a new government that isn't official yet. Where's the money coming from? So really what you have in the American Revolution is a largely volunteer army. So Mary Hayes' husband said, I want to go fight in the war, and she couldn't stay home because there's no support. They rented their farm. If he's going to go fight in the war, he's got to give up the rent on the farm. Now what does she do? So she went with him. A lot of women went with their husbands, their fathers, their brothers to the war, and they became camp followers. And camp follower, I think, later became sort of turned into a pejorative that meant prostitute. And indeed, some camp followers were prostitutes because, soldiers like sex because human beings like sex. But a lot of camp followers followed the army, and they did all the stuff that the army couldn't do for itself. That people volunteered in the army to fight, but armies like the modern army or the modern navy or the modern pick your military branch is also consists of cooks and doctors and lawyers, etc., etc. All that stuff, and that these camp followers, who were by and large female, did those jobs. They did laundry, they did cooking, they did nursing, and sometimes they fought in battles. Molly Pitcher, her husband, was on a crew that ran a cannon because it takes like 4 to 6 guys to fire a cannon, depending on what artillery piece it is. He was injured and fell down. I think he lived. I don't think I know he lived, but he was injured, and she stepped. She must have been right there in the thick of the battle. She stepped in and she did his job, and she fired the cannons and helped fire the cannons. And apparently, she was quite good at it. She would typically, after battle, she and many other women, then you'd have all these men laying around injured, and she would take pictures of water to them, give them a beverage. And lots of women did this so that Molly Pitcher became a name not just for Molly Hayes, but for all of the women who followed the troops and helped out in any way. Pitcher, like pitcher of water, and Molly is a nickname for Mary, and Mary's a very common name. So Molly Pitcher essentially meant woman who helps out. Yeah? But it was based on a real woman, Mary Hayes. Yeah? Let's go see what else we got. All right, here's Bernardo de Galvez. Oh, Bernardo. Um, because I think we all, I've been saying English, 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 and New England, but Galvez was he was Spanish or Spanish colonial American, and he was and Louisiana, which is now one of the 50 states in the United States of America, was a Spanish colony. But Galvez thought, I love these ideas. I love this stuff we're talking about. We should, I think in Louisiana we should fight too, and we should join these Americans and 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 fight. Uh, Down in Louisiana, they would have been fighting the Spanish and not the English. So he essentially engages in revolutionary thinking because here he is a representative of the Spanish government, but he says, yeah, no, I and the people around me, we want to be Americans too. Um, so they, they, they turn and they fight the Spanish. Um, and he was like, everybody's welcome in my army. He was a really cool guy. And so his army was full of free black people and escaped black people, people who had escaped slavery, and Indians. And they oh gosh, I've misspelled British. I'll fix that. Hopefully, when you see this, it's spelled right. Um, uh, and indeed his rebellion in Louisiana and his polyglot army of all kinds of people did indeed um, defeat the Spanish and help the American colonists take control not only of Louisiana but of that entire Gulf down there, upon which Alabama, Florida, the Caribbean, but the Gulf is the part close to the United States. Anyway, Galvez, yeah, not just white English guys, some Spanish guys. I love that. Yeah? Next one. Okay, remember I said that all sorts of people fought in the war, including a number of Native Americans. I picked Polly Cooper here. I am not going to try and pronounce her name. I am not. I am not good at that. Um, Her name translated means two kettles together. I'm going to call her Polly Cooper. She indeed did use Polly Cooper, so I'm not being disrespectful. She was an Oneida woman. The Oneida were one of the 7 tribes of the Seneca in sort of upstate New York. They were a very powerful and important tribal group, and she helped feed George Washington's army during Valley Forge. Washington took his war used to be like baseball. It was only fought in the summer, and in the winter you retired to camp to wait for spring to fight again. And one winter it was particularly hard, and George Washington had his army at Valley Forge, and there wasn't enough tents, and there wasn't enough food. Things were going very badly for them. And Polly Cooper and, and and her people, it wasn't just her, it was a group of Oneida people. They brought corn to the army, and then the soldiers were like, "Oh, we'll just eat that." It was dried corn, like kind of like dried hominy, and the soldiers wanted to eat it. And she's like, "No, you can't do that. That'll make you sick. Here's what you do." And she would go around the camp and show the men how to soak the dried corn and then cook it so that they could eat it and get nutritional benefit from it. She also fought in battles with an axe and a gun alongside her husband. She may have been a British spy. Um, she did a lot of stuff. And if you remember from the first lecture, Native American groups tended to be way less oppressive about gender roles. And so the Oneida people wouldn't have thought it any particularly remarkable that not just Polly Cooper, but many other Native American women would fight alongside the men. So Polly Cooper's your representative. I don't want you to think she's the only one that did it. Just like in the next slide, we're going to talk about a woman who disguised herself as a man and fought in the war. She was not the only woman who did that. These are just representatives. And Crispus Attucks wasn't the only black man who fought in the war. He's just the representative we're talking about. That these people all represent larger groups of people like them. Yeah? Cool. Well, here's my favorite. I love Deborah Sampson so much. In 1775, Deborah Sampson, a woman, uh, she wanted to enlist in the army, so she got dressed up in her brother's clothes and she enlisted in the Continental Army. And she went off to war, and by all accounts, she did a fantastic job. And she fought in several battles, and she won an award for bravery. Um, and then she was wounded high in the thigh, and she knew that she was going to get caught. Um, so she retired she retired her commission, and she went back to her hometown and took up being a woman again, and then she married and she had kids. So she has this very successful military career. And indeed, her commanding officer, we think, probably knew she was a woman, which tells us that probably some of the men that she fought with probably knew too, but nobody really said anything. They recognized her as a fellow soldier, which is really cool. And then the other thing that's really cool about this, and her story is much bigger than this, but this lecture's already long. Um, is that then after the war, uh, there was tough times. Her husband died. She's got these kids, and she said to the American government, the new American government, "I fought in the war. I deserve a pension." And the Congress was like, "Really?" And then she got some letters together of some guys that she had fought with who said, "Yeah, she fought. She was fantastic." And eventually the U.S. government gave her a pension. Um, for fighting in the war. And the key to this is this very early in the 1780s recognition that and then they gave some other female soldiers uh, pensions. This very early American recognition that women had been soldiers and that their service was such that they deserved a recompense in their old age. And that's totally key because, like, when I was a young woman in the 80s and 90s, there was lots and lots of talk about whether or not women should be in the military. And then I think more recently, women wanted to be in combat. And I don't understand anyone wanting to be in combat, but people do. And that indeed, if you were a lifer in the army, if you don't go someplace with combat, there's promotions and raises you can't get. And women were saying, if you keep us out of combat, you keep us from that. And a lot of Americans, conservative Americans, the kind of people who want to take women's right to control their bodies away from them, were saying women shouldn't be in the military or they shouldn't be in combat. Um, and America had already decided they could be in combat in the 1780s. In the very war that made America America, the United States of America said, yes, women can and do fight in wars, and we recognize that. So we're still catching up to that. Yeah. Cool. Deborah Sampson. Oh my goodness, there it is, my darlings. Look at you. You made it through. Do, do, do. I would sing, but I'm so hoarse. Also, I should probably never sing. I won't sing. Anyway, so endeth our fourth lecture. And what are the big takeaways from this? Some small handful of great white men didn't make the American Revolution. One. Two, the American Revolution was really first a revolution in people's hearts and minds about changing the way they thought about the world so that more individuals counted and rulers were less important and more replaceable. The American Revolution and this lecture, I hope, is meant to encourage you to think that your thoughts and your beliefs matter, um, and that you shouldn't put too much faith in rulers. Also, whatever your beliefs are, those are your beliefs, and if you feel them strongly, you shouldn't force other people to believe them because that's very un-American. Um, um, and that mostly important, regular people can change history, as we can stand up and say, this thing's wrong, and we can change it. We know we can change history because we did it to become us in America. And if we could change history, we can still change history. All we have to do is stand up. You look around the world right now, and it's really easy to think, I am one small person, and I'm very busy with my job and my family, and looking at TikTok and Instagram and whatever else you guys do. I don't know. I ignore all that stuff, um, and so I don't have time to vote, or I don't have time to 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 get to care what's going on, or I don't like what's going on, but there's nothing I can do about it. And none of that is true. You have time, because we all have time for things we think are important. And I think making sure the world, doing something about making sure the world operates in a way that that doesn't impinge on you is important. It's a thing worth making time for. And two, you're not helpless. Individually, maybe we're a little bit helpless, but the thing that regular people have going for us, and I'm a regular person too, despite my PhD. I'm not that fancy. Um, there's a lot of us, and we can move the world because we've moved the world before. Yeah, go us. Is that good? All right, that was another long one. That's an American history lecture. You'd have done that in class and it had taken an hour and a half, so we did it here. Um, good? I think we're good. So you've got the lecture this week, just like always. You have some kind of discussion post and some kind of video assignment. I don't know what yet, because as I record this video, I haven't invented those things yet. I'm retooling this class a little bit. Anyway, you'll know it when you see it. Yeah? Okay. Good job. Keep going. I know college is hard when you're busy. I know that very few of you are super privileged and have a lot of leisure time. I know this is hard. I know you get tired. I know you get overwhelmed. I do too. But keep in mind you're in college because you have life goals and you have ambition, and there's things you have to do for that. Yeah? You can do this. I know you can. Yeah. Well, I can't see you, but I think you're great. Talk to you next week.